Jonathan. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. And I apologize in advance if my voice is hoarse. I've been talking all day, and we'll see how it goes. So I'll introduce myself real quick. I'm Rob Ringham. I'm an architect here at Infusion, and I work in a mobile subject matter kind of role here. So all things mobile all the time. I can be reached at many different ways, and please feel free to reach out to me at any point if anyone would like to. I'm more than happy to have any sort of dialogue you guys want. So yeah, this is me, and I've been with Infusion for about 6 years, actually about 7 years. Thank you guys for coming up here. So thank you to Mobile Learning Lab for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to Nancy and Monica for getting this all set up on our side here. I'm actually a bit of a stranger to the Infusion Toronto office, sort of a stranger. I come up here fairly often, and this office is new to me too, so I appreciate it. So let's talk about mobile analytics and user engagement. What I want to do is basically, boil everything that I'm going to talk about tonight down to 2 questions. One, how do your users interact with your app? How do you find out how your users interact with your app? And 2, how do you keep your users coming back? And how do you keep them engaged? And these are easy questions to ask, really easy questions to ask, and I think they're a lot harder to answer. And for a long time, the way that we answered them was something along these lines. And tell me if this sounds familiar. You got a 3-month project, and we're going to plan a half a day towards the end of it, and we're going to scramble to integrate Google Analytics, and we'll try and get as many messages in there as we can, and we'll see how it goes. That doesn't work so well. I've seen, there's really usually 2 different outcomes to it. One, you either forget, and you run out of time, and you end up going blind into production. You actually don't have any sort of analytics out there, and that's not a great solution, or not a great situation to be in. Or 2, you end up in a situation where you get all this data that comes out of the service that you've integrated, and it's not really all that insightful or really useful. And that's really kind of a shame because, and this is what I hope to kind of convince you guys of tonight, if you're a little bit more deliberate and strategic in the way that you actually approach analytics in mobile apps, you're going to get far better results, far more valuable information that you can bring back and incorporate into your product. And I found that by asking these questions, for pretty much every feature I'm designing or I'm building, it becomes a lot easier to be more deliberate about this. So here's what we'll talk through tonight. I want to get into some of the latest trends. If all you've seen lately is Google Analytics, if that's your big exposure to mobile analytics, hopefully this will be some useful, eye-opening information. We'll talk a little bit about strategy for integrating these tools and coming up with a plan for it. We'll talk a little bit about how you actually integrate with analytics tools. We won't get too deep, just some high-level information. We'll talk about some of the common features out there. We'll look at some of the vendors, and then I've got a fun little demo for you guys that we'll take a look at in a little while. So, trends. And, well, we'll dig right into it. If you look at the numbers, if you look at the venture funding or angel funding behind a lot of the leading solutions today for mobile analytics, the numbers are really staggering. There's a huge amount of money being poured into it because it's just so much money is going into mobile apps itself that people want to understand that ROI, and services are absolutely cropping up that are actually trying to help you understand the ROI of building an app. And so lots of competition. Really just incredible numbers. They may be a little bit out of date, but most of these are pretty much up to date. So lots of money going into this. And as a result, there's a ton of innovation. Really a lot of incredibly exciting new features. Again, I keep going back to Google Analytics, not that I have anything against it, but if that's all you've ever seen, there's a lot more cool stuff out there that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And the cost has really gone down for a lot of these services, especially if, hey, maybe you're building an enterprise app and you just want to get information about how your enterprise users are using your app. With a small enough user base, you generally can even get away with the free tier. Really low cost and a lot of great value for your time and actually integrating with it. So what can you do today that you couldn't do yesterday? coming back to Google Analytics. Well, here's a couple of things that are relatively new and I think are pretty exciting to be able to get information out of your users from. So here's one, touch heat maps. One thing that I always try to get people to understand when they're actually designing a mobile application is, hey, if I'm using this in one hand, where are the hot spots? Where am I actually integrating with this? Where is it uncomfortable for me to reach and touch different parts of the screen? Actually being able to get this information from live users, from deployments to the App Store or your enterprise users, hugely valuable and gives you a lot of insight in how your users are actually using or interacting with your app. Mobile A/B testing. A/B testing has been a big thing in the web world for a very long time. And it's not that there hasn't been A/B testing in the world of mobile, it's just that it hasn't necessarily been as accessible. And with services like Mixpanel, or there's some other ones, Optimizely is another one, you can get mobile A/B testing for very little effort on your part, and you can do some really cool things with that. And we'll look at that in a little while. Campaign attribution, marketing campaign attribution. So you've spent a whole bunch of money to advertise through Facebook or through Twitter. How do you know that that's driving the right results from your users in your application? That's kind of hard to tile that information together unless you have some sort of magic behind the scenes. And a lot of these services that are out there, Localytics in this case is the one that provides this, provide you that magic for you. This one's kind of cool, notification campaigns, so push notifications, in-app notifications that are using machine learning behind the scenes to detect the best time of day based on your user base for a conversion and automatically help you schedule those notifications out to other users. That's actually a really powerful technique. I don't talk about it enough in here, but it's really cool and I highly recommend if you ever check out Mixpanel to take a look at it. Other features. So this is a feature from a service called Amplitude. This one's kind of cool. It's the concept of growth discovery. Taking a look at certain behaviors that can drive explosive growth, as they call it, indicators of success in your strategy for building out your mobile application. Really cool. Then one more, and then we'll dig into some more content. This is one. This is more on the user engagement side, and there's a couple other user engagement tools that we'll look at a little bit later. In-app surveys. One thing that I've always wanted to be able to do is ask my users as they're using the app, which requires me to be standing right in front of them as they're using it. What do you think about it? What would you like to see? Do you have any feedback? If you're not able to stand in front of your users, it's a lot more difficult to do that. Now with tools like with Mixpanel, being able to deliver in-app surveys that come up right within the app, right, so your users have the context of the application right in front of them, hugely powerful and really cool kind of stuff that you can do with that. And we'll look at that today as well. So strategy around this. So clearly there's a lot of cool new stuff out there. How do you take advantage of it? And I'll be the first one to admit, if you're taking a look at the landscape out there, it can actually be pretty overwhelming. There's a lot of different tools out there. There's a lot of different techniques. And it really can be overwhelming. And it can be hard to actually, it can be hard to pin down what you actually want to do. And so hopefully this will help kind of channel that for you. So there's a ton of stuff that you can measure through these analytics services that are out there. Tons of stuff, and I found that for the most part, they really fall into these categories. So you have analytics around adoption or growth, analytics around stability, what kind of devices or platforms your users are using, what's popular for them, their behavior in your application, how engaged they are, and really how much money your application is making at the end of the day, or how much money it's facilitating you to be able to make. Tons of different things, and there's way more than in this cloud. And this is the question I always ask, why are you measuring these things? From those categories, what are the questions you're really trying to answer? And this is what I want to focus on tonight, is not just listing out these questions, but really coming up with an approach for finding the right questions to ask here. And my philosophy kind of comes from the lean startup world. If you've never read the book, Lean Startups, it's a fantastic book. Kind of changed my whole perception of building out minimally viable products. And so A lot of this kind of comes from that. So I highly recommend that. So let's take a look at a couple examples. Are users engaged? Well, out of all of these things here, what are the indicators of user engagement? Well, you might look at user retention. That's one model, but session frequency and session duration, that can be a little bit more telling sometimes than user retention. How do you, kind of combine those things together? Are your users actually, spending money in your application or doing something to further your financial goals of your application? You can look at all these things independently, and this is kind of my point, out of the whole universe of things that you're able to measure, what are the right things to look at to roll up to answer your question? And this is kind of where I get to being more deliberate about your analytics strategy. If you're just measuring everything out there and you're just hoping to sort through things, you're really not going to get great results. But if you're really deliberate and you specify the questions you want and you really think about how you want to answer them, you're going to get better results. Here's another one: are our apps stable? And this one's a lot harder to actually identify. App crashes. Well, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's easy to identify crashes out in the wild. But that's not going to tell you, are users annoyed with how long it takes this one screen to load? That's not going to tell you, it's not going to give you information about how your application works when a device is jailbroken. Things like that. There's a lot of different things that go into this that can be pretty difficult to actually suss out and understand that. Do users want to keep paying us money for our product? This is another good one. And again, it's not particularly easy. And really where I'm going with this is, the whole point is be deliberate about it. Take a look at the questions you want answered and look at the right metrics. Really spend time planning out the right metrics that you want, because some of this work you're going to have to do manually. You're going to have to take a look at this metric, compare it to that metric, compare it to that metric, and then come up with an answer based on that. And that requires effort. And kind of going back to my original example of starting out with a half day of time that's planned for integrating Google Analytics at the end of a project, that's clearly not sufficient to do this type of planning. So that's kind of my overarching point here. So what I generally recommend is to plan your analytics and user engagement strategy the way you would actually plan out building an application. Consider integrating against these types of services and digging up the information that you want from your users as first-class citizens in terms of product features. I don't look at analytics as a separate type of feature from some sort of screen that integrates with Apple Pay or something like that. I look at it as a complementary feature to that type of screen, and it requires the same amount of thought. Well, maybe not the exact same amount of thought, but a decent amount of thought to actually be able to answer questions about how users use a specific screen as it takes to build that screen itself, which is kind of what I'm getting at. And again, going back to my original point at the very beginning, don't bolt on analytics at the end of a project. You're going to be scrambling, and it's not necessarily going to work all that well, and you're really not going to end up with great results. Really weave it into your development process. And this means starting from day one, planning out an analytics strategy, planning out what metrics you want to record for each feature that your app that's going into your app. Making sure that time is invested for each, maybe you're an agile team and each user story, you're building out a feature per user story. Make sure that there's time invested in actually incorporating analytics into each one of those user stories. But don't bolt it on at the end and hope things are going to go well, because it's not going to go that great. And prioritize things. One of the things that I like to do is start with a top 10 list of the most important questions that you want to answer based on your users. Something like, hey, maybe you're a content publishing app. Do users like the content they're seeing? That's a pretty reasonable question. That can go on a top 10 list. Do users interact with content that they're seeing? Do users report, bad behavior when they see comments? Those types of questions, Come up with a decent set, maybe 10 or 15, and start there. Don't necessarily start with everything in the world. You're never necessarily gonna hit all of those. If it becomes a pie in the sky approach, you're always gonna end up missing things. Start with a targeted list of things. Be deliberate about it. Be strategic about it. You'll be able to do a lot better. And kind of coming back to the lean startup approach, it's one of my favorite episodes of Friends. I really approach it like you're building a minimally viable product. Create hypotheses about how your users are going to use your project. Measure, actually come up with specific things that you actually want to come up with specific metrics that you want to record for features, and then iterate on it. And if it turns out that you're asking the wrong question, which you'll probably end up finding, maybe you're finding you're right asking the right question, but maybe you're not. Do something else instead. Pivot away and look at another metric to actually analyze. And this kind of comes back to my point about prioritizing and not necessarily tracking every single possible piece of data out there. And this is the question that I ask. If you're building a new product, would you build every single feature in the world that you could imagine for it? No, of course not. And this kind of just capture everything and sort through the data later, which I've had people request that of me, and I always have to kind of say, like, let's take a step back. These approaches are there's good intentions behind them, but you're going to end up with a muddled set of metrics down the road that aren't really going to help you answer how your users are using your product. They're not going to help you. I just got a lot quieter. It's not going to help you really understand your users. So be targeted, be deliberate. I found that there's a much higher return on investment if you're strategic and deliberate about your approach. Hopefully I don't need to really convince you about this, but when you really think through something, you generally are able to think through the edge cases for it, or you're able to maybe think of something that you hadn't really planned out before. It's the same thing with analytics. The same thing with user engagement. You can say, well, I want to track every single possible interaction on this screen that has a map on it or something like that. But do you really? No, there's probably only one question you want to know about a single screen. Be deliberate. So there's a couple different ways that you can actually integrate these tools, or not necessarily these tools, but actually do analytics. The first approach, which I see a lot, is this kind of homebrewed approach. You want to actually build out all of the infrastructure yourself. Maybe you're going to build some sort of web service behind the scene that you're going to pump data up to from your mobile app up into the cloud or something like that. Generally, this approach is usually, I usually see this approach when there's concerns around data privacy and making sure that information stays within the control of an organization or something like that. And this takes a lot of work, but you can actually get pretty decent results out of it. Or you can go with a third-party analytics service. And we already looked at a couple of the cool features that are out there. And if you had to go build touch heat maps from the ground up, well, good luck. It's not that easy. You're probably going to get a lot more bang for your buck by outsourcing the complexity around analytics to someone who was invested a lot more money than you are going to in it. Not to say that homebrewed approaches aren't a good idea. There are certainly situations where you might want to go that direction. But hey, it's more expensive. It's going to be more time consuming. It's probably not the time you want to be spending. You probably want to be spending time building out your product. And it can be error prone. A lot of these services, these third-party analytics services, they're finely tuned to upload data, and there can be a fair amount of data that gets uploaded to these services, to upload data at an optimal time. So maybe it's keeping track of how much bandwidth your application is using and only kicking off upload jobs of data when you're not actually doing a lot of uploading yourself. Being able to do all that, having to do all that yourself, there's a lot of overhead in that, and you probably don't want to do it because you're not necessarily going to do it as well as someone who spends all their time on that type of feature. So oftentimes there's lower cost in integrating with this. There's lower effort in actually doing with it, and actually taking one of these approaches. You'll generally end up with pretty decent results, but yeah, there's some compromises. going back to the point on data privacy, a lot of the services that fall under this category usually are built on public clouds. So one that I know of, for example, Xamarin Insights for the Xamarin platform, that's all built on Azure. So hey, not every client is necessarily comfortable with public clouds. I think things are starting to shift in the direction of that anyway, so people are probably maybe a little bit more open to that than they were before. So there's compromises. It's something to keep in mind and something to think about. I've also found that, well, I'll come back to that in a little bit. So you decide to go with a third-party analytics service. What I recommend is analyzing defensively. Most of the analytics vendors out there are really similar in the API that you use. We'll talk about what that looks like in just a minute. I've found that you in many cases can reasonably abstract that away. You can abstract that complexity into your own analytics service that your application uses. And what I try to do is build kind of modules behind the scenes that integrate with individual services. And the reason why is not all of these services are necessarily going to be around forever. There's a lot of money in them now today, but hey, maybe next year, one of them might go out of business. Not unheard of. Or they might change their pricing model. That's probably a little bit more realistic. They might change their pricing model to something that you're not necessarily as comfortable with. So I generally try to build some sort of abstraction layer around analytics services that I integrate into mobile applications. I want to talk real quick about kind of the primitive concept in analytics. It's really the concept of an event. And this is really the way that a lot of these services work. And you can kind of see here, I've kind of mocked out an abstraction layer around one service, Mixpanel in particular. An event is really kind of the base unit of analytics. It's some sort of message that gets sent up to an analytics service, usually has some sort of metadata associated with it. In this case, I'm just sending up a message that only has a title, a key, but you can absolutely include custom metadata, and it usually looks, something like this. Some of these things, might be baked in, like the Mixpanel API that you integrate into your application might include some of these by default, but then you can include your own custom metadata if you need down the road. And it's usually, this is the C# approach to it, but it's usually something like an NS dictionary or a C# dictionary or something along those lines. It's really pretty straightforward. Not all that hard, but what's cool is you can take this analytics primitive and bake or really build a lot of different types of features on top of it. Do you have a question? Oh, sorry, I thought there was a question. And this is just what it looks like. Hey, so this is an event handler for maybe an item tapped event list in an item tapped event in a list or a table view or something like that, and really not rocket science. I'm just sending up some sort of event. But the key thing I want to call out here, and this kind of gets back to the strategy and why the half a day to integrate Google Analytics down the road is a bad approach, and we'll see this when we look at the demo in a little bit. You really want to have things like a consistent naming convention for your product for these types of messages. This can get really complicated to sort through on the back end for these analytics services. So don't shoot yourself in the foot. Spend some time thinking about it. Be a little bit more deliberate up front. So we've got this primitive, the concept of an event. What can you build on top of it? Well, and this is a little bit less based on the event. This is kind of like the base buy-in for a lot of the services out there. So this is a dashboard from Countly, one of the services we'll look at in a minute. Most services have something like this, and this isn't particularly mind-blowing. It's a dashboard. It shows you how many users are using your application, total sessions, total users, new users, what devices they're on, what resolutions they're on. Most services have something like this. And this information is hugely useful by itself. And oftentimes there's really not much you need to do other than integrate an SDK to get this kind of information. So that's useful. And this kind of gets more to the answering like a top 10 list of questions about what you want to know from your users for your product. There's other things. Funnel analysis. Funnels are pretty cool. You basically can push up events for different areas of your product. So maybe like a search screen where you search for a product. a product details screen where you view the results from a search, product purchase step where you actually go ahead and click the buy button. And you can actually get information that tracks how users progress through these workflows. So out of the 20 users who initially searched for a product, only 7 users bought something, a 33% success rate. That's pretty important information. Maybe there's something in the way that you present information to your users that's preventing them from actually going and buying something. I would want to know that. But, and this kind of gets back to being deliberate, you really need to kind of key these things in a way that, one, makes sense for your application. You don't want to necessarily have 100 different events, open search screen, tapped on search result, basically a whole bunch of things. You want kind of key things that help you really see the steps the user took through some sort of workflow. And again, this is just based on the concept of these events that you publish. Really nothing magical about it, but hugely valuable from a business analytics perspective. Cohort analysis. This is another kind of a cool feature, and we'll look at an example of this in the demo app that I have in a minute. What are cohorts? Well, they're related groups of users who share a common characteristic within a specific time span. What does that mean? Well, something like this. On this day, 45 users signed up for the application. That's the characteristic, the common characteristic. And in this time span, looking forward, a week later, 43% of those users from this cohort, this group right here, they stayed around. A week or 2 weeks later, from that, only 24% stayed around. 18% 3 weeks later. But in January, for some reason, we have different results. Or I guess in this example, there's similar results, but you get the idea. This can give you, really valuable information, particularly when you're talking about retention. So we'll see an example of this in just a minute. So this is really cool. A/B testing. This is one of my favorite things that I actually wish I had a demo for this. I actually don't, at least not today, but this is really cool. Being able to do split testing in a mobile app. You can do something along the lines of, hey, when you go to click a buy button for some product, you get version A of the purchase workflow, and then for a different percentage of users, they get version B of that workflow, and you can see which one performs better. Really cool, and it's actually really surprisingly easy to integrate. Due to the nature of the architecture of the demo, it's a little bit harder for this particular demo, but I promise it's actually really pretty easy to integrate these types of things. And if you're building an Objective-C or Swift or Java app, pretty straightforward. On the user engagement side, what are some common features? Push notifications, actually being able to directly target specific users in your user base with custom tailored push notifications. Maybe you've got someone whose entire job it is to reach out to users on a regular basis through the application and try and get them to try a new feature or something like that. And for users who don't necessarily use push notifications or who disable them a lot, you can actually do in-app notifications that they can't necessarily disable. Yeah, they're not going to get a push on their home screen or anything like that, but when they open up the application, they may see something like this, where they can get notified of some new feature or something like that. These things are really super easy to integrate. For example, for the iOS side, all I had to do was set up the push notification certificates behind the scene for my development sandbox, upload it to Mixpanel, and boom, now I have this functionality more or less enabled. Really cool. Some of these services even go so far as to be able to integrate with SMS services, be able to text people, maybe email people. Really useful. And you can do A/B testing with them. So you can send this version of this notification about our new bill payment feature to 50% of our users, and some other message to 50%, another 50%, and see how that actually works. So that's really cool. We talked about mobile surveys. There's another very related concept, mobile polls, to be able to do polls and see how users feel about certain features or something like that. A lot of the services that offer this have a really easy to use, or have really easy to use types of survey editors, and you can see dashboard-like, views of the results, and that's really cool. Azure Mobile Engagement has a pretty cool survey feature, so does Mixpanel. Really nice. We'll just go through a really quick kind of lay of the land of some of the analytics vendors out there. I won't spend too much time on this because I do want to get to the demo. But hey, like let's first look kind of a high-level overview. What I think the takeaway from this is that there are a lot of similarities between these different vendors. And there's also a lot of similarities in terms of pricing, as well as what kind of tiers they have in terms of free tier versus paid tiers. And there's some outliers here, but for the most part, a lot of these services are going to give you a good mix of the features you want, which is cool, particularly looking back at how you actually abstract away different analytics services so you can swap them out if you need to. It gives you a little bit of safety net if you need to abandon Localytics and move to Mixpanel or vice versa or something like that. So that's cool. Some outliers and some notable things. One option is, hey, like Countly does an on-prem version. No one else does that. So if you really are concerned about about data privacy or something like that, hey, that's an option for you. Mixpanel and I think Amplitude, they do A/B testing. But other than the outliers, for the most part, a lot of similarity. App Analytics, this is the one that offers the touch heat map and gesture recognition. This also has a really cool feature around user interface suggestions. I promise I won't read through all this. You can more or less get all that information from their website. Notable features is the important stuff for this. Cool service. Amplitude, this is the feature that, this is the service that has the growth discovery feature. So if you're really interested, if you're building a startup and you want to see, is my app going to take off, you might go to a service like this to take a look at things like, their microscope feature, to drill in on behavior data to get really detailed information about how your users are using certain things. One of the cool things about Amplitude is there's direct SQL access, so you can actually query directly against their services if you want to pull out your data on a really granular, or maybe you want to pull out your data every night or something like that. You can actually do that. That's pretty cool. No one else offers that. Countly's cool. The on-prem support for that's useful. Google, I actually need to come back and refresh this. I'm sorry I don't have that for tonight. I know they've just done a recent refresh of some of their services, so there's some cool new stuff that they have. This is kind of like the entry level, go ahead and start here, and then grow from there. Not a bad service to use if you have to use it. Localytics, this has some A/B testing functionality, in-app and push messaging. This also supports the campaign attribution feature. So if you're doing a lot of social network integration, this is a good service for you. Mixpanel, A/B testing, mobile surveys, lots of cool features around email and push and automated notifications, things like that. Nice service. And this is the one we're actually going to take a look at in a few minutes with a demo. And then finally, one last one that I'll call out here, and this is really only specific to the Xamarin platform. If you're building apps using Xamarin, which is actually the way that I built the demo app for tonight, this is the only service that can do crash reporting for Xamarin products. And this is actually provided. There's a good free tier for this, provided for free by Xamarin, and then you can obviously upgrade to get more specific analytics or more powerful analytics functionality if you really need to. Cool product, Xamarin specific though. Yep.
I noticed you didn't mention or discuss Crashlytics.
Yeah, Crashlytics is interesting, and it really probably deserves a spot on this list. It's really a great crash reporting tool. I don't really see a ton of analytics or user engagement functionality in it, which is kind of why I left it off here. But it's a really great tool for crash reporting.
Okay. Yeah. What about Optimizely?
Yeah, I don't actually have it called out here, but I do like with Localytics. It's not on this slide, but it's on another one. Like if you wanted to do A/B testing with Localytics, you would integrate with Optimizely. That's the approach that you would take for that. So I don't have every single thing out here. This is really more just to kind of lay of the land, some of the options that are out there. There's definitely more, but these are a good set to take a look at to start. So I've got a demo for you. And according to the law of live demos, it may not always go well. We're going to give it a try. I only throw that out here because I've had demos go down on me in the middle of a presentation, and that's no fun. I don't think that'll happen tonight, though. I'm feeling good about it. Okay, so what did I build? So over the weekend, I threw this app together, a really simple application. And when I was trying to come up with a scenario to show tonight, I was actually in a grocery store and I was walking around. And I actually get kind of overwhelmed in grocery stores. I actually hate shopping in grocery stores. There's 100 different types of ketchup, and I never can find it. So, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had an app that you could look up your store and find out where ketchup is in whatever aisle it is? It's kind of the idea behind it. This is actually all really a smoke and mirrors app. There's no integration with any backend services. I didn't go crazy with this. I spent honestly about 5 hours. I made this icon all by myself. I put it together in OmniGraffle, and I showed it to a couple of people, and basically I shouldn't quit my day job. It's not my strong suit, but that's okay. So I'm gonna quickly fire up my app here. When I was thinking about doing this demo, I didn't think about the fact that I had to hold the microphone as well as actually control this. So we'll give this a try. We'll see how it goes. On the left here, I'm going to show real quick full screen. I've got my phone here. See, live demos. They'll get you. I've got my phone here, and it's just tethered to my laptop. And here's my app. Here's StoreQuest. Really, again, really simple. It's just a basic map. This is actually built on Xamarin Forms. It took me 4 hours to put it together. Not really that bad. So I've got a list of recent stores here at the bottom. I can actually search for a store if I want, though I really can't. It's not real. It's all fake. And hey, like maybe I'll pick Target and get some information about it. And if I want to find items in the Target near me, I can tap into here and see where different items are in their respective aisles. I threw ketchup chips on the list here. This is actually one of the things that I love about coming up to Canada. We don't have ketchup chips in the US, or we don't have good ketchup chips. So it's one of my favorite things coming up here. And I promise there's more about Canada that I really love. But I love ketchup chips. I can't get them in the US. That's the key point here. So here's the app. And there's a couple of controls at the bottom here that are actually sending up events. And as we've been going through the application, events have been pumped up to Mixpanel, and we're going to take a look at some of the questions that I want to try answering. So here's my Mixpanel dashboard. 1 second. So here's a segmentation report. Here's a whole bunch of different events. And we'll first look at just basically this. A whole bunch of different events and then the frequency of those events. And it's kind of cool that we can actually slice and dice these. So if we want to see every single one of these events that are specific to, or we want to take all these events and then we want to see how they break down by device, for example. iPad versus iPhone. You can do that and click on this. And now you can get a bit more of a sense. Sorry. Please enter a valid value. Oh. Here's all of the events that took place on my iPhone. And here's all of these events that took place on my iPad back at home. So you can kind of get a sense of how users are using based on different devices. This is one example of a segmentation report. Let me just zoom back out so it's a little bit easier. What's another one we can look at? Well, I've got a bookmark here. Let's look at user location. Most of the testing I did was in Liverpool, New York, so you can see all the sessions segmented by city, which is kind of cool. And a lot of services offer things like this. Some do a little bit better. Google Analytics, for example, really cool maps you can drill in, awesome stuff like that. Not so with Mixpanel, that's fine. So segmentation reports, pretty cool. Basically taking a look at events, their frequency, and slicing and dicing them. Useful. Funnel reports are a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to take a look at, let's see, this funnel report. This is a workflow of users, or this is representing a workflow of users who have started the application, searched for something, and then viewed the store page for it. And so in this example set of data, only 50% of the users, all of which were me, but only 50% of the users actually completed this funnel. And you got to get a sense, hey, maybe search isn't as important as we thought it was. I don't know. Maybe that's not the conclusion you would draw out of this. For this type of app, search is pretty important, but you get the idea that you can get this type of information from it. Here's a better example. here is a funnel report for users who, from the main screen of the application, tapped one of the favorite stores down at the bottom. And for this, and actually because I've been playing around with the data, I kind of skewed it. Earlier this was about 10 or 15% based on the test data I put together. You could maybe draw the conclusion that no one really cares about favorite stores. Well, that would be important because you could take all of this real estate and put something else there. And those types of questions, being able to identify these types of questions and then actually put together reports to back up conclusions about them, that's kind of what I'm getting at when I'm saying be deliberate. Look at things like screen real estate. Try and come up with analytics flows that are going to help you determine if this area of the screen is more valuable as feature A or as feature B. That's going to help you. We'll look at one or two more features, and then we're kind of wrapping it up. I promised, or I talked a little bit earlier about retention reports. Mixpanel's a little bit finicky around this, but here's an example of a retention report. So I built this on May 25th. Out of the one people, who was me, who used this on May 25th, a day later, 100% of those users came back. Same thing for March 26th. I made a couple of different types of user accounts, and for this particular group of users, only 16% of them came back. That'd be really useful information that you could actually draw useful business conclusions based off of. So maybe this group of people represents people who signed up during some sort of trade show or something like that. You get a sense of how well they responded to your application. That's the kind of thing that you can do with this type of report. I want to show. Let me just do this real quick. I want to show surveys real quick because this is actually pretty cool. And this is where the law of live demos may come into effect. Let's hope it doesn't. I'm going to build a survey real quick. And I'm going to send it to my phone. I'm basically going to publish it, and the users who are using this application, i.e. me on my phone, will be able to see it. We'll answer it, some of the questions that come up in it, and then we'll look at how you actually can visualize those responses. So I'm going to create a survey here real quick. I'm going to say, put a basic survey here. Give it a name. I'll send this out. This is basically just a quick workflow here where you can target specific users. So you could do something like, I want to send out a survey to users who signed up 2 weeks ago and no one else. You could do something like that if you really wanted to. In this case, I'm going to send it to all of my users, me. Just open a name here. I'm going to say send it out as soon as possible. And now the survey is out there. So I found with Mixpanel, I usually just need to close and reopen the application. It's kind of based on user session. It's gonna try and target the next session that a user joins. So I'll come in here and I'll run my application. Hey, there we go. It's a nice little survey right inside the application. Really, really powerful. Sorry, I keep moving this around. Hey, and in this case, I really like the search feature the most. Now that survey is done. Really low effort for users to actually interact with. One thing that I kind of compare it to is, hey, you can ask for reviews of applications. There's a lot of reasons for asking for reviews. You want to get ratings in the App Store, and you also want to see what people think about your application. How many people tap on the, yes, I'd like to leave a review for my application when that little message box comes up? I generally don't. I generally ignore it, but a lot of people will also kind of ignore it. But this is something that it's right in their face. It's right in the user's face. It's really not that intrusive, and it can give you feedback almost instantaneously. So let's take a look at what comes up in Mixpanel. So my feature survey. Take a look at the analytics for it, and hey, there we go. There's an example. And so 100% of the people who responded to this like the search feature. There's another example of a survey. This is one I put together over the weekend. And hey, maybe you wanted to find out things like, has this product actually helped you in any way? Why haven't you upgraded to the Pro version, which is $19.99 a month? Do you have any comments? You can actually do comment fields and get text responses from users. Really cool, really low effort, and really high value in interacting with your users and getting them to come back. You can also do in-app notifications, push notifications, and things like that. I think we're kind of coming up on time, so I probably won't show that unless anyone really wants to see it. And that's kind of it for the whole presentation and the demo. All right.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem.
Applause for us.
Thank you, guys.